Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today we talk about this. I can already hear some of you thinking, oh, another 1845 adjudant, we know about them. And I can hear some of you thinking, oh, another 1882, we know about those for sure. And well, the truth is we're going to talk about them anyway because, well, there's never enough information or entertainment you can have from any model of swords, I think. But also because, well, it's true that this sword comprises elements both of the 1845 and of the 1882. It's actually a model in and of itself, although not an official one, but one you hear about in collecting circles or in auctions, for example, or sales. So it might be useful to know about. What we're looking at here is what is commonly referred to as a infantry officer, Sabre, 1882/45. You'll sometimes find those numbers reversed, as in 45/82, but I find the first version to be more correct. Those numbers refer to the dates of the model of the two components of this sword, so the hilt and the blade. I find the first version to be more correct because French swords were determined by their blade. So the blade needed to be produced in a government-run, a government-approved manufacturing facility, whereas the hilt could be custom, it could be an old or different version, but even just a completely new custom hilt made by private furbishers. So this is an 1882 model /45 because it has the hilt of a 45. Now, is this an official model? No, it's not. This is technically an 1882. But so many officers seem to have liked this combination of hilt and blade that we still have many of them floating around today. And there are enough of them and there's enough interest in them to the point that they have started to be identified by their own name. So it kind of became a bit of a non-official model of a sword, which is, I think, a very interesting development, historical development for a historical object. So why was this combination so common? Well, we know for certain that the 1882 in its standard issue version was very controversial, to say the least, or completely disliked, maybe more accurately. And that is usually for two reasons. One, the fragility of the blade, and the other, the lack of hand protection of the very open branches on the hilt. But if we look at this sword, it's not that like it offers much more hand protection. So if anything, it offers less. Yes, there's more, this is more closed and protected on where you have defense, but where the branches would be, you have nothing. Your knuckles are completely exposed to blows. Whereas even the very open work and fragile 1882 still kind of protected at least half of your knuckles. So I don't think, at least for this variation of the sword, I don't think the main reason was a choice of practicality and increased defense. I think it was more of an aesthetic choice. Most of the officers that would have had to adopt the 1882 would have been assigned these before the shift. And it's quite likely that they simply did not want to change something they were familiar with or a look that they felt matched their vibe or their uniform, for example. There might also be, and this is a hypothesis, a element of protest to an extent. So being forced to use a sword you dislike and you actually find not only not appealing, but dangerous and fragile. It may be that officers tried to show their contempt for this new model of sword by adopting or by keeping an old element visible. So the only visible element of the sword for most of the time obviously is the hilt. So their freedom to be able to choose an old hilt may have simply been a way of saying, yeah, we really don't like this sword. By the way, I have to apologize for the awkward way I'm holding this sword today. As you can see, I'm kind of grabbing the porte-épée in my hand here. And that is because, as you can see, it's very damaged and frayed, and I don't want it dangling around and getting ruined even further. So anyway, back to the sword. It's a custom model that evolves into a semi-official model, we can say. And that is at the core of what makes it interesting, I think. So with that being said, we'll take a look at all the details of this specific version of the 1882/45. Okay, so we'll take a look close up. Obviously, we've seen elements of this sword on their actual original versions in previous videos, so we won't focus so much on the configuration and everything, but we'll look at a few other interesting details I think may be nice to look at. I'll have to, again, be a little bit careful with the porte-épée, so there might be some focusing issues. It may be a little bit more difficult than usual. But we'll start from the hilt. You can see it's the typical 1845 hilt. It has this lovely open work, has the upturned quillen with like foliage style decoration. It's kind of like a leaf. And this upturned lip here, which here has received a little blow at some point, which bent it slightly. We have a nicely preserved horn grip, which can use some cleaning, of course. And the usual 1845 style pommel with that central flower surrounded by branches and the knuckle bow. Now, there are no markings, no maker's marks on this hilt, which is, well, not unheard of, but normally you would find, not maker's marks, sorry, like inspector or proof marks from the facility. So what I think here, even looking at this weird sheen the hilt has, you can see it has like almost a pinkish reflection at some point. There you go, you see. So this kind of color, brass with weird colors, is actually fairly common in late 19th century custom hilts. You find this very often on 1896 style fantasy swords, of which I've made a video of another one. And it's usually because they were new or different or unique alloys that were made to kind of be more fancy. So some would almost resemble copper, some would have this kind of changing color pattern. So paired with the lack of maker's marks anywhere, I have the feeling that this may be one of these later alloys and that this may not be a actual 1845 hilt from 1845, let's say, or from service, but actually more of a private copy of one from the late 19th century. But I can't be sure of that. If any of you has information on that, please let me know. You can see though it's very dirty, so it will require some nice thorough cleaning to get back to a decent shine. Now, we can also take a look at the porte-épée, since we mentioned it during the video. It has this lovely gold thread work and these tentacles, almost, it's almost like an octopus, that are wrapped around this core, which is made with a coarser thread. And these normally, I think, would have been closed, so they would have been firmly wrapped, almost like a little grenade or something around the... But I think over time, everything got loose, and now it kind of bloomed into this weird flower. The thread, as you can see, is in very, very bad condition. So, yeah, there's not much restoring to be done on the porte-épée, unfortunately. Now, moving to the blade. It's a fairly standard 1882, but there are a few considerations we can make about it as well. Well, it's slightly dirty and grimy, and it does have, I'm not sure if that's visible, but some few rust spots. However, yeah, you can see them here, I think, and a little bit of paint, but it's a standard 1882. What makes it interesting, I think, is the fact that it's not nickel-plated. So this is steel, pure steel. This is unusual-ish for 1882s. As far as I can tell, what I read was that the later versions of these blades were often non-plated and that they're the more rare versions. That's not to say they are rare, but they're more rare than the nickel-plated ones. However, that is not really confirmed by the only mark we find on this sword. Let me get that in focus for you. But here at the Ricasso we see a helmet crossed with a sword. and then some letters around it within an oval. Actually, I should probably put it this way because that's the direction of the symbol. There's an F, D, B. There we go. There we go, FDB. Not perfectly readable, but it's there. Now, FDB stands for a famous sword maker called, the company was called François Delacour Bac, or Bakes. I'm not sure, it's spelled as Bakes, like with a CK, but being French, I'm not sure how I would pronounce it. And this was a merger of two separate companies. So the company of Delacour had existed since 1837 and was a well-known quality blade producer from Paris. And in 1860, the company merged with Bakes, or Bakes, and they became FDB. And this company was around until 1890 with this style of marking and with this denomination. So this would mean that this blade would be 8 years into the production of 1882s, which isn't really consistent with it being one of the late ones made only out of steel. So my impression, also given the lack of other official markings, proof marks, or anything on this blade, makes me think that perhaps this may be a private purchase blade. So although regulations did not permit that, we know that officers do what they want, oftentimes. So if any of you has more information about the combination of this mark without other makers' marks and it's being full steel rather than plated, I'm more than happy to hear what you have to say. So I hope you enjoyed the sword as much as I do. It's just, as I mentioned already, but it's very interesting to me beyond the specific details of the sword. What strikes me is the ability of an object to take a life of its own. So this is basically a custom job. It's a multitude of individual custom jobs that together become a new unofficial model. And I find that very fascinating in terms of how this object evolved in the course of the last 100 years, let's say. So with that being said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon in another sword video, just as soon as I can film it.